is under the context that one of the comprehensive strategies that are being considered will provide resiliency against further shocks. This needs to be supported by a renewed action portfolio, looking at the indexes and the alerts from our ecosystems to contribute effectively to sustainable development. We are currently at a very decisive moment so that stakeholders can approach the communities with productive and sustainable models and inclusive in order to not leave anyone behind. Thank you. After having heard Linda McGuire, the Taché Regional Director for Latin America and UNDP, we are now welcoming Adrian Bonilla, the Executive Director of the Ulac Foundation. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity of participating in this virtual event. Although we have somebody from Ulac in Santo Domingo, this is Dr. Ana Barrera, one of our coordinators. I would like to begin by welcoming the colleagues and international organizations who are here at this event and attending virtually and also in person. For myself, for the Ulac Foundation, it's an honor to inaugurate this event together with all of you that is focused on resiliency and health for the tourism sector and finding policies that could mitigate the impact of COVID-19 and identifying practices that could be reproduced and generate sustainable measures for the future. And efficiency really has to do with responding to critical times. It refers to the possibility of adapting to an unexpected situation, a challenging situation. The idea of resiliency has to do with going back to normal, but using resources to do so that would enable more resiliency in the future and overcoming these impacts that uh, we've seen on human life. And as one of the organizers, we want to project that image to identify sustainable pathways for recovery. The UN Program for Development and Ulac have been developing different spaces for these conversations. Ulac is an international and intergovernmental institution comprised of governments in Latin America, the Caribbean, and those part of the European Union focused on if driving the relationship between both the study of vulnerabilities and the successful practices and the instruments of regional cooperation by regional cooperation and international cooperation that would have the potential to generate viable and feasible responses both for the member states and all society. This cycle that we began in the Dominican Republic, and we will follow up with new events and workshops in Latin America and also in Europe because it's really a global phenomenon that tourism is facing, and many societies of our region, as well as the European societies, hence tourism has an impact on the GDP and on countries' incomes. And it's very important to discuss not only the survival of these countries, but also the survival and quality of life of communities themselves, our populations, the direct vendors and service providers that were affected in one way or other by the pandemic. We want to focus on the situation of the Dominican Republic as a state that has begun to recover, but it's in the Caribbean. So it's important to understand the context of the Caribbean countries and islands, because in this industry, the tourism in these countries is vital to the livelihood of communities themselves, of the capacity of funding and investment and economic sustainability for people. Because what's most important here, of course, is to provide a better quality of life for the population. In the 70s, or since the 70s in the DR and other Caribbean countries, and globally as well, we've seen the logic behind tourism and its increase, its exponential increase. Due to globalization, tourism has expanded. It owes its expansion to technology and the economic capabilities and access. It's not just about the very rich who have the opportunity to travel, but now more and more we see mid-income groups traveling, and it's quite a global scenario. In the case of the Dominican Republic, it supports about a fourth of the revenue of the country. But even beyond that, the tourism sector generates a lot of jobs. And by creating these jobs, we believe we have to go back to the fact that many of these services, many of these jobs, and the quality of these services in the Dominican Republic, in the Caribbean and Europe and other parts of the world are gender focused. The possibility of involving women in these services, and of course that generates enormous wealth for countries and institutions that polarize this activity. In 2019, for instance, 6.5 million travelers, non-residents, visited the Dominican Republic in 2020. It reduced to less than its 20% of that. The pandemic really affected the economies, especially in the Dominican Republic. Hence, it's important to see that sanitation and disaster prevention and global contraction is at the core of this industry. Hence, we have the question, how do we generate tourism that's resilient to these risks that we've seen now and also future risks, both natural, economical? It's part of a set of policies that would help us prevent risks for the communities and for individuals and their vulnerability before these unexpected events. So we currently have this opportunity of exchanging experiences, lessons learned, and knowledge regarding these measures. The Dominican Republic, for instance, has seen a growth once again of this industry, hotels, restaurants, bars, 26% growth in the first or the second quarter of this year, whereas the rest of the economy hasn't followed along, and it's registered the best growth really in its history.
We need to take advantage of this to think of the new economic activities at all different levels, and tourism specifically, that we want to promote. In this sense, the idea of international cooperation, the idea of promoting responsible tourism that goes in line with the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, make part of any policy that we must rethink. Tourism that's socially responsible, that promotes investment based in communities and people that provide these services, and of course, those benefited. Tourism that's more diversified in economic and social terms, less monopoly, added value towards purposes of cultural wealth of these communities, these people, and the destinations that are chosen. Tourism that's environmentally sustainable, to make this more a condition, not only of cooperation, but requirements in the market of those people searching for these services. A tourism that's finally profitable and financially sustainable, directed towards the providers and the people that generate these services, that generate production, that generate the different products surrounding the sector. It will be a way to make these societies more prosperous, more equitable, and with higher social equality. And what we're talking about is a tourism that's strategic and efficient with regulatory frameworks that favor these communities and the people. In this sense, from the Ulac Foundation and the people in our program of the UNDP, it is important to promote this sort of discussions in a way that we can advance, having shown that our countries, that the people in our countries are capable of adapting and overcoming the harshest of conditions. Then I want to just thank the possibility of offering me the opportunity to speak, and great success. After the intervention of Adrian Bonilla, Executive Director of the Ulac Foundation, I want to greet the different panelists joining us and the people joining on the different social media networks. Also, I want to remind you all, the people that are present in these digital platforms, that we have simultaneous translation, and you can pick the language that you prefer in the icon referred to as interpretation in the bottom part of your screen through Zoom. This event is the second of a series of 5 events about sustainable tourism, which is an initiative led by the UNDP and the Ulac Foundation. In this case, we have the support of the government of the Dominican Republic as its host. We want to greet excellent Minister of Foreign Relations in the Dominican Republic, all the people here present from the different institutions of this nation. Monsignor Galed from the Catholic Church and Dean of the diplomatic group, the chiefs of the different diplomatic missions in our country, Ms. Inca Matilda, representative of UNDP in the Dominican Republic, Ana Barrera, coordinator, senior of the Ulac Foundation program, distinguished directors of the different universities joining us today, friends from the business sector, and the people joining us through the different digital platforms. At this time, we would receive Roberto Alvarez, Minister of Foreign Relations of the Dominican Republic. Good morning. Hello, and Greetings to all those present here today, representatives of UNDP and our Herrera coordinator of the program of the Ulac Foundation, Monsignor Alex Barrer, Dean of the Diplomatic Body, Vice Ministers, functionary officials of the government, and the people from the government of the Dominican Republic, directors of the different universities and academic centers joining us today, friends from the business sector, and the people following us through social media, people from press, ladies and gentlemen. For the Ministry of Foreign Relations, it's a great honor to be a host of this activity with the support of UNDP and the Ulac Foundation. The importance is twice as important for us because we're talking about a topic where the Dominican Republic, as it's obvious, serves as a reference point, and that is tourism. And within a multilateral framework with our allies on the other side of the Atlantic and our closest neighbors of our surrounding area in the Caribbean Sea. When we present our program of foreign relations, one of the priorities that we established was strengthening the links with the other states member of this group, given the participation in the multilateral scenario was successful, and we must build upon the basis of the best possible relations with our neighbors. In this sense, the European Union has played a role in the first sense because we study the political exchange between our country and the Caribbean in the last 30 years. The European community has always been present, collaborating with our cause. Let it be through exchange or commerce, and therefore foundations such as Ulac, where not only do we have the participation of governments, but also civil society, academia, and youth, represent a great contribution towards a better integration with interests and values. Last year, fruit from the pandemic, we saw the greatest drops of the tourism sector that we have ever known. And this affected gravely all our economies. Today, nonetheless, the Dominican Republic is going towards a recovery point at a fast pace, estimating that we will end the year with 4 million visitors and a growth of the GDP of around 10%. This activity that today gathers us is a sample of the resilience word because it represents the learning that we have gathered through this global crisis and the fact that we have made or taken the determination of working through this opportunity. Once again, we call to assume a communal resilience in which we work cohesion to face a crisis that generated instability and uncertainty without respect to borders. We are taking advantage of this opportunity to make the necessary decisions and to make our citizens more respectful towards the environment facing climate change. We have to be resilient. We must bet upon cooperation, synergy, to strengthen our democratic institutions in each one of our countries and to ensure within them the respect and the promotion of human rights. Know that for the Dominican Republic and our ministry, and for me in particular, it's a great honor to have you all here in our home And with this, I would motivate you all to work hardly, as hard as possible, so all our people are able to achieve the recovery and economic growth that ends up promoting social equality. I finally thank you all for all your efforts, dialogue to find pathways to improve tourism services in our countries that have been crucial among ourselves and our oceans. Thank you all very much. After listening to the words from the minister, Roberto Alvarez Gil, we receive Katia Alfred, ambassador of the delegation from the European Union. Distinguished Minister of Foreign Relations, Mr. Roberto Alvarez, distinguished Vice Ministers, distinguished Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, Ms. Linda McGuire, and Executive Director of the Ulac, Adrian Bonilla, distinguished Dean of the diplomatic body, colleagues, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you joining us in this morning. It's an honor for me to have these opening words for this seminary about a topic of high importance for the Dominican Republic and a country where recently I've been representing towards the European Union. Today, I'll have the opportunity to share experiences and good practices with a focus in the tourism sector. I want to take the advantage of this opportunity to share with all of you some brief words with respect to the European answer to the challenges that come from the greatest sanitary crisis in our century, in the century. Our response is based on European principles of solidarity. And facing this sanitary crisis, we opt to maintain ourselves united to ensure equal access to vaccines in all the countries in Europe and to have trials of all international solidarity. We also share half of our vaccine production with the rest of the world. In the crisis that's been the strongest in the last decades, we've opted to maintain united with Next Generation EU. It's a package of economic stimulus that has been the biggest in the history of the European Union, with an amount of 750 billion euros to push the recovery for the next years. And we have not forgotten the planetary crisis that's been dire for humanity, and we've opted for a green pact, an ambitious program to face climate change. We have one sole answer to these challenges: build back better and greener, to build a greener Europe, more digital and more resilient. Today, we are here to discuss precisely how the tourism sector may change in this sense. We are willing to share our experiences with our partners in the Caribbean and Latin America. We are willing to support the program for economic recovery in this region with our funds for cooperation together with the member states in the spirit of Europe team. We are willing to support specifically the recovery of the tourism sector through our solidarity and vaccination. We are willing to support specifically also in concrete with our digital certificates. We have generated more than 4 million certificates connecting 42 countries and 4 continents. And we are also available to support the region to face other fundamental challenges linked to the tourism sector. The environmental challenges, such as the protection of biodiversity, marine contamination, and the development of a blue economy that's sustainable and general, one of our priorities of cooperation with the Caribbean. I would like to end by greeting this initiative and reiterating our support from the European Union to the government and to the people of the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much. After these presentations, we pass the floor to the moderators for today's session. Mrs. Inca Matila, representative of PNUD in the Dominican Republic, and the senior coordinator for the Ulac Foundation, together with our presented panelists, Rafael Blanco Tejeda, president of the National Association of Hotels and Tourism, and Mr. Jose Carlos Diaz, economist and expert associated from UNDP. And with this, we begin the technical intervention section, beginning with Dr. Ana Barrera, who we receive with a strong round of applause. Thank you very much, Melissa. Also, from my side, it's a great honor to be able to co-moderate this technical table about a topic gathering us here today. A warm welcome from the Ulac Foundation to all of those joining us, both digitally and here in the audience. For us, we have tried to gather different experts in the topic of resilience in a matter of health and the projections towards the future to generate a more sustainable tourism, economically, environmentally, and socially speaking. And here we have with us 2 different panelists, and for me, it's a great honor to welcome you. In a first round, we will invite the panelists to intervene for around 7 minutes with respect to 3 main questions, as we would say. From your point of expertise, what have been the primary challenges that you have faced in this crossroads, and from the national point of view or a sectoral point of view, for the necessity to overcome the pandemic? A second question would be, what solutions or strategies, good practices have you found? And could you maybe share these learnings, these experiences as elements that have worked? And as a third and final question, what would be, from your perspective, recommendations or opportunities towards the future of how to be able to achieve a higher impact and to optimize strategies in this stage of recovery? After your intervention, we will indicate to the people in the audience to direct one question or two to the presenters and the panelists. And in the same way, the people following us through the Zoom platform, there is a possibility of directing one or two questions through the chat function to the panelists. And we would conclude with some brief final words in this session.
We would then begin with Mr. Rafael Blanco Tejeda. Welcome to this panel. Thank you for having joined us. And you're the president of the National Association of Hotels and Tourism. And for several years now, you are the president of Pro Investment, a business specialized on the development of projects focused on tourism and housing, and hotels such as the Hilton and Homewood Suites. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. On behalf of the Tourism Association of the Dominican Republic, we're very pleased to be here with all of you and to share these experiences throughout the process. And I would like to begin by putting you in context. Pre-pandemic 2019, tourism represented a 10.3 of the global GDP. And that is a growth of 49%. And in the Dominican Republic, it was even a higher growth because our economy is basically based on tourism. And so we saw a growth of almost 60% in March when the whole pandemic began. All of our hotels were packed. It was historical for the Dominican Republic, and we had to empty out all of our hotels from one day to the next, which was unprecedented. However, time has passed and we initiated a recovery process, and we're very happy with how it's going.
Thank you.
Globally,
I
the
need to be like
recovery, the growth has been 37% in the Dominican Republic. We were able to double the visits that we had in 2020. So our recovery has been even higher than what we see internationally. And this is the product of our strategy. First, a public-private partnership. From the very beginning, we sat down with the state and we understood that only by unifying as a country, we would be able to overcome. And so we immediately put into place the health protocols, and with the Ministry of Tourism, we validated it, we put it into practice. We created a tourist board managed by the Ministry of Tourism with all the different stakeholders involved to find solutions on all of the different challenges. And we also established a public-private work table, to focus specifically on the market and have the most impact as possible. In health, we established the Board of Health, uh, led by the Vice President of the Ministry of Health, and we have been truly successful. We've been a model in the region in pandemic management and vaccination as well. So undoubtedly, this has led to recovery for the Dominican Republic. This has generated trust internationally on the fact that the Dominican Republic is a safe country for visitors so that citizens from around the world can come visit. And we're so happy to see the involvement of these actions. And the second point of recovery has been to apply public policies in a comprehensive way. We've done this insofar as taxation, jobs, and employment. and everything around tourism. So monetarily, the Bank of the Dominican Republic, when this crisis began, they approached us and loaned out to provide sustainability for the companies in order to prevent a whole collapse of the industry and keep it running at a competitive level so that when things came back to normal, went back to normal, we could then recover these loans. The workforce is really our main driver, the employees themselves. And the Ministry of Labor generated certain programs to support our employees so they won't be affected and to minimize that impact, the impact of the pandemic in the whole sector. Thankfully, the recovery process has initiated. We've incorporated about 70% of our workforce at the plants, and we believe now that the high season is coming and we need to be even more aggressive in recovery. And what we're doing is one, asking ourselves, how can we consolidate this recovery? We went from these enormous rates of occupation in January, and we closed September, and we saw September 2021 with a higher growth of about 54%, and we believe December will be even better, but we need to recover occupation. But we also need to see the rates. We need to see a process of reestablishing rates in a way that we can also begin discussing revenue, because having tourism doesn't just mean occupation, but that the businesses will be producing enough revenue to expand, to grow. And one of the other factors and a big question is the increase of prices around the world. This has affected business revenue. We even have products that are lacking. So the next year we'll have to be looking at the impact on businesses and on recovery. And I think that's something we need to consider. The next year is where we'll actually consider this, look at it into depth. And I would also like to add to this conversation, it's not so much regarding the pandemic, but as a challenge regionally, is the climate change factors. And that's becoming a serious problem in the Caribbean. And we're seeing how it's now having an impact on the recovery itself. I think that a regional effort in this sense would be very timely. Thank you, Rafael, for that first intervention. How interesting. We see how key it is to create partnerships between the public sector, the private sector. We see how important it is to work on public policies, on the situation, the local actions, and the importance that you mentioned of building trust. We won't be able to go back to building back better without that trust. So now I want to welcome another panelist who connected digitally. She's online, Lisa Idar. She is the director of the Division of Surveillance Prevention of Disease from the Public Health Institution of the Caribbean, CARPAMHI. She's a specialist in infectious disease, in uh, nutrition, tourism, and health. So please, let's welcome her and ask her to add to this conversation. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. A very pleasant welcome. Good morning to all the panelists here. I apologize because I'm in a CARICOM meeting at the same time, but I really wanted to lend our Caribbean flavor to this, this conversation. I want to start by saying, we are talking about sustainable tourism and the road to recovery. And I want to start by saying, the COVID pandemic is with us for a long while. It's not going to be easily dissipated because we need to get to that herd immunity. And while we get to that, it is important to note that, it really has impacted on tourism, especially for the Caribbean. It has devastated our tourism because, most of our Caribbean countries are tourism dependent economies. So for us in the Caribbean and in terms of good practices, what has worked is adopting this approach in the road to recovery using a smart, safe, and sustainable measures that really encompasses a regional, harmonized, and multi-sectoral approach. What COVID has demonstrated to us is that health must be intertwined in any tourism measure. We cannot view tourism and health separate. For us in the Caribbean, because we are so tourism dependent and because we have seen before COVID-19 came, we have seen outbreaks of, let's say, norovirus. And when the threat of Ebola, we have seen what it can do to our tourism. The Caribbean Public Health Agency would have looked at the negative impacts on tourism, and we would have realized too that the health of our economies is very much entwined to our tourism tourism sector. So for instance, the first case of SARS and Zika and chikungunya, as well as now COVID-19, would have come through tourism. So we have to ensure that health is intertwined in tourism, and we have to ensure that we implement health measures in tourism to ensure safe and sustainable tourism. And if we ensure safe and sustainable tourism, we will ensure safe and sustainable economies and lead to economic recovery. So for CAFA, a couple of years ago, we created a novel program. It's a first of its kind in the world called the Travelers Health Program or the Tourism and Health Program. And it looks at addressing the health, the safety, and the environmental threats to tourism. And we did that through developing novel tools. Some of these tools include an early warning electronic web-based monitoring system. So this is a confidential system that identifies threats. It just requires you to put in information on syndromes. It alerts you if something is going wrong very quickly so that you can have a rapid response. The big aim of this is to prevent spread to large numbers. And the good thing about it, it is confidential. So, the hotelier doesn't have to worry about the information getting there, but more importantly, stop spread. And this is working for us. We are seeing many cases are reporting, countries responding very quickly, and you're not seeing those large outbreaks, being reported. To support that, we have two sets of regional guidelines, and this is based on science. What is the guideline for responding to illness if you're in an accommodation or land-based setting? And what is the guideline for responding to illness if a traveler is coming, via the sea or via a cruise ship? And it's important to know the science because we deal with 26 countries. We need to know these countries are very small and they are very close to each other. So we cannot have different border measures. So it's important to be able to put that in a form that countries can use. Together with the guidelines, we back that up with training. So before COVID, we would have done a lot of advanced food safety training and environmental sanitation training. Then when COVID came, we wrapped that up. We created COVID-19 training for the hospitality sector, for the food and beverage industry, for the yachts, for the tour operators. So, and it's specific. It's like from the beginning when a visitor comes in to the end, what do you do? How do you now infuse COVID-19 protocols in your everyday practice? And we have trained, upwards of 7,000 persons in the Caribbean with this training. Following that, I heard someone speaking about policy. We all know that we need to have the backing or the governmental backing. So we created a regional travelers health policy, and that was endorsed by our ministers of health and our ministers of tourism and our ministers of trade. That really speaks to, if you have an illness, you report so that you can respond very quickly. The last set of tools, we created hospitality, 7 hospitality standards, from food quality to waste management to sewage and so on, so that you have the tools. And to put all of that together, just recently in November, we launched the Healthier, Safer Tourism Stamp and the Caribbean Travelers Health App. The stamp is unique in that in order to get that stamp that from CAFA as a public health agency, you have to go through the training and you have to use the system of reporting. So to our knowledge, it's the only measurable stamp that's out there. We measure it and we monitor so that our travelers coming to the region have that added advantage or confidence that any facility with this stamp would have gone through rigorous training and is monitoring illnesses in their establishment. And every facility with the stamp is given free publicity on the Caribbean Travelers Health app that's available both on with iPhones as well as the Google stores, so that you can be able to get it. You can be able to have that information at your site. And we cannot do any of this without partnerships. The hallmark of the Travelers Health Program is the public-private health and tourism partnerships. So we created the program with the Caribbean tourism industry, with the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and we have the public health agencies all as partners, like Public Health England and the Center for Disease Control. And then we have the private sector, like the cruise ships and others. So they all work together and we have a network. So we share information, because with tourism, the idea is to pick up something very quickly before it spread. We don't want COVID cases spreading or any viral illnesses spreading. And this is working. So this has been our good practice. It is working. We are working in many countries at the moment, and we have been able to identify illnesses very quickly, reduce it, and we have been able to build the capacity of the tourism sector. And in doing so, we are promoting the COVID measures, get vaccinated, wear a mask, what is the reason for hand hygiene, and so on. So these tools are available for everyone. They are free of charge. And so I wanted to just talk about this as a good measure for recovery. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctora Indar.
Thank you for first intervention. We learned about these interesting tools that have been implemented at the Caribbean level and that I think are important to highlight, from the training of the staff that is key, and others such as the stamp, this quality stamp, and many others. Before passing the floor to my co-moderator, I would like to remind you all joining us, there's a possibility of directing questions to our panelists, both from chat and Zoom, and here in our audience. Inca, then the floor is yours. Very well. We pass the microphone and the floor. It's a pleasure for UNDP here to be part of this conversation. For our organization, it's really one of the first events that we have semi-presential, semi-virtual, and for your knowledge, we have right now around 250 to 300 people connected around the different countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And we continue with this conversation towards finding these key points to make our tourism stronger. Our next panelist in the Dominican Republic is Jose Carlos Diaz, recognized economist from Spain, and he's also collaborated several times with the UNDP and even in the Dominican Republic, taking us out of our comfort zone and allows us to think from a different perspective. Jose Carlos is recognized as one of the most influential voices making part of the panel of experts from the Central Bank in Europe, helping with projections about the challenges in the European economy. He has been recognized for developing innovative proposals for the reactivation and recognizing the situation of labor markets, electrical markets, and especially in the tourism sector, integrating policies of sustainability in the long term. He has also been part of the technical team that has elaborated the plan for recovery in the Lanzarote island in Spain. But let's get into the matter at hand. We could continue reading his curriculum, and that would take a long time. What we want to talk about here today, Jose Carlos, is within the search for this tourism and making it bulletproof, basically talking about the challenges and where are the opportunities. We are at a moment that is basically taking us away from how we used to live. What are the future value niches that you see, Jose Carlos? Thank you, Inca, as always. It's great to be part of this session, and the UNDP is great work that you all do, and it's a pleasure as part of the European Union to participate with the Ulac Foundation and the different countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. The program that has been explained is 750 billion euros is a lot of money, and Europe is quite an open area, especially for the Dominican Republic and Latin America. I encourage people in the Dominican Republic to go make business in the European Union and many opportunities. Possibly one of the most open channels of economic relations between Europe and Latin America, which unfortunately is small. There's not many channels, but Europe, Spain, and the Dominican Republic is one of them. And this is one way of incentivizing, motivating this behavior. And the agro health industry is something that applies here. This will reactivate the sale of wine, for example, which is a product that we produce, but we will have new channels, new pathways for this commerce. But I would just like to encourage you that there's a lot of business happening in Europe through this channel and through UNDP. It's a great pleasure for me to be present here today. And from this point of view, I would like to present. And I do not know, and we don't have the pleasure of having Rafael here as representative of the sector. So I'll show the global vision, but it's quite useful here to look at the European plan and how it's focused. Previously, we'd been fighting this topic of climate change with the Green Bill, focused on sustainability and circular economy. And given the pandemic, we've incorporated the matter of digitalization. These are the three main pillars of the plan. These pillars are extremely necessary for Latin America and the Dominican Republic. Specifically, the team from UNDP are focusing on this for the 2030 agenda, but this is precisely the point. From 2015, we've been repeating the same message over and over. We knew that this would come to us. Future is already here. We're not really talking about the future anymore. It's a present. And the advances we've had in digitalization towards the times of the pandemic, it's equivalent to the advances we had for the last 10 years. So everything we've done in digitalization previous to the pandemic must be updated. Matter of sustainability and circular economy, evidently, we have a lot more care. But what we try to do, I don't know if we manage to do so, because we talk about so much about sustainability that we forget that there may not be sustainability if there's not economic and social stability. The first objective has to do with employment in this sense, and we must always look at the people. But these three areas are key. And with respect to the pandemic, I think it's contained in more developed countries, and I include the Dominican Republic with a high rate of vaccination. In December, we'll have an antiviral medication, and this is a case where we can protect with this medication aside from the vaccines. And this is the main objective. We will live with this virus for a long time because viruses are part of nature. The problem is not the virus. The problem is that it would collapse the health system and increase the mortality rate. That's the real problem. So these two problems are practically resolved in half of the world population, and we still have the other half. And from UNDP, we send this message of making an extra effort from the countries that have already started vaccinating, especially in Europe, to vaccinating the countries that have not yet been vaccinated, because the virus is a worldwide problem. It's a matter of efficacy about fighting the virus. And as Inca said, I'll try to look towards the future, which is somewhat more complicated, but it's a bright future, I think. The past isn't certain, and the reality is that what we're seeing after the pandemic, and as Rafael mentioned, what I see from the macro figures of the Dominican Republic is that tourism is coming back. People want to enjoy life. I think this is normal, and we're seeing numbers definitely increasing and a recovery in place. The only bottlenecks we need to look over is one, evidently the matter of health. And here I have seen you have digitalized these certificates, and the image of having safety for the tourism and tourism see the Dominican Republic as a safe destination is a key point. And second, the matter of connectivity, talking about the airports and the possibility of putting these countries in the middle of the airline traffic. For the Dominican Republic, this is key, as well as it is for Spain. Good news that came out an hour ago. United States announced the opening of their borders for November 9th, and slowly this will be a determining factor, and I'm very happy to announce this. In Europe, we do not have this luck. We still have a lot of problems. Asia also has a lot of restrictions. This is limiting tourism that's a transnational nature. 4 million tourists is what we received before the pandemic. So this part is key. But now that we have the hotel people here, one thing is to have overcome the virus and to have a recovery of income from tourism. But there's a different issue, and it's the matter of what's left behind, the effects. We can recover this, but we must look at what happened of what we are left with after the pandemic, and we must look at two different important sectors. One is the hotel sector, well represented here, and the other are airlines and operations and connectivity, because we must be paying attention to this. For example, we have news in Spain about the fusion about Iberia with another airline, which is primarily not possibly not your primary tourist, but it's important. And this fusion is having some issues, and there might be problems for European companies, but all these measures, and to have a direct relationship as we have had with the connectivity and procreation companies is key, because these are the people bringing the tourists, and the effects have been brutal for the airline industry. We've had fall about 80% income for many of these companies, and their crisis has no precedent in history in the immediate future. This will be costly to overcome this part of the crisis. And I will say what the hotel sector might want to do, but of course, respecting this situation, but being aware that the sector is in a delicate financial situation after a strong pandemic. What changes have we seen? Well, primary is the tourism will continue, but having the case of the United States and the strategies in Spain, the American and the Japanese tourist and is basically the tourist that spends the most, and that you already have access to these tourists, and this allows you to have a strategy of what type of tourists from the United States are you looking for. Not every country can do this. In the Dominican Republic, you can. So my advice, given the impact on employment and wages, says that the segment, not premium, but middle to high, is where the quality of tourism is. That's where you have the best hotels. That's where you have best employment for tourists, and these jobs are better paid. So this is just a strategy that Dominican Republic already had, and we must continue along these lines. This type of tourist is changing ever more towards climate change in the matter of sustainability. So all these matters of the UNDP is not just strategy. If a tourist wants to go to a sustainable destination, well, you give it to them or they're going somewhere else. It's just not whether you like it or not. If the client or the tourist doesn't like it, then you lose that opportunity. Mexico is there, other countries in the Caribbean are there. So competition will be present. And if the Dominican Republic does not aim towards that sustainability strategy, then they will look for it elsewhere. There is a sensibility in the hotel sector, for example, well described just a minute ago. The economy of water has been studied in Europe and in the Latin America and the Caribbean, and this is doing quite well with respect to recycling, and how the water reaches the ocean is something that's quite delicate for the tourism. For example, Santo Domingo doesn't have this, and there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And this is an island, so at some point, this current brings this water back. So it's something we need to look at, and this matter of circular economy is important, but it's basically using oceans that are clean. And this is investment, this is employment that ends up generating a greater GDP. Investing in something that we don't see sometimes can be complicated, but improving the roads, for example, and solving these problems in the case of Santo Domingo is something quite complicated. These investments are associated to the mitigation strategies of the country and what the UNDP is doing in the Bay in Samaná Peninsula. And these type of recovery scenarios are quite strong with a urbanistic point of view, because this is the focus we should give it. In matters of digitalization, before the pandemic might look quite simple, but I try to say these things simple just so I understand it myself and then others can understand what I'm saying. Digitalization in the tourism sector is understood in a quite simple way. The client and the tourist needs to communicate with you in a digital manner. And if you don't have a channel of communication and a strategy to communicate with them, then the client will go elsewhere. That's as simple as it gets. This is a fact. The great technological revolution that we are seeing in the last 40 years is primarily has to do with data. The algorithms had already been present, and this is part of our lives. But the massive capacity of applying this is basically what was not present. The clouds on the internet and the costs is basically part of this revolution. There are companies, especially in the United States, that have advanced quite a bit about the order of this data and the quality of the data, and have models for utilization with human behavior, where consumers and tourists to see what the tourists are doing at each point in time and what services you can offer. If they are more advanced, well, they have competitive advantages that we don't have. So everything that the country does in this sense in the hotel sector will change. And this is already happening, and it will happen more and more. The matter of operation that was understood before in Spain and the Dominican Republic, living from the tourism sector, is a model that is in extinction. I don't think it'll disappear, but it's basically has a due date. And this is a change that is a burden for the hotel sector. And it's not easy to change the four wheels of the car when it's already running, but it's something that happens. If you don't change these strategies, then you'll end up having problems. And then I'll end up with a positive note. As the great cooks say, the key is to leave people happy with the meal. The opportunity is present, and we mentioned this in the matter of recovery that we did for the UNDP with COVID last year. But what is happening and what will continue to happen is a new tribe, which are digital nomads. We already have them here and already arriving ever more. And this will continue to increase in this process of digitalization of companies and processes, because there will be workers that do not need to fulfill certain hours. And what these digital nomads need, especially working for a corporation, not an individual level. This might be easy, but how do you organize this in a way so a corporation can reconcile that their workers are at a destination in a stable and safe way, in a connected way? So if you need to basically work online, you can do so. So touristic countries have certain advantages. You have airport connectivity. You have flights from New York, basically, and any other city around the world. This is a competitive advantage that not all countries have. You already have the quality of life, the climate, and the beaches. Mr. here had this advantage. And this is a great point. You have a competitive advantage in this sense. And then you have everything that has to do with the type of nomad may bring. And this is where we need pedagogy to have a visible change. We are working in Spain with the Ministry of Tourism in a project where I'm working, as I do with UNDP, investing in innovative companies and other things that we need to potentiate here, but that's not part of the topic at hand. This is just another leg that's incorporated to travel tech and tourism. There's an enormous potential in this area, finding Dominican companies that can do this. And this has to do with what the digital nomads search for, not only a good destination, not only good weather, not only connectivity. The future of the world economy in the next 30 years will be about people and knowledge. AI will do a lot of things, and what really generates value are people and a level of qualification that basically people that can do things that robots and AI cannot. A model of AI is generated, and then you have a pandemic such as what we faced, then the model of AI will just collapse. But there are people that can make decisions changing the scenario. We don't have the model from previous times, but we need to make the necessary actions. So value, this data is basically a commodity, and what really gives value is people that can generate models based on these data, generating decisions in a more efficient way. This is what really generates value, and this is what these digital nomads will generate. These digital nomads in the Dominican Republic, mixed with your own people, this will increase the quality, and what you're bringing really is investment at a hotel or industry level. You're bringing technology and knowledge, and this will be connected. And here I get into my own subject with universities and with research and innovation centers and innovation companies in the Dominican Republic.
It's, of course, difficult to adapt. It's a lot of change, especially in what is happening with the employees. Of course, it doesn't happen from one day to the next, but once you have it in place, how do you leverage it as much as possible so the whole economic structure is shifted? That's one of the challenges that we're going to see in the next years. And we'll see if there'll be more or less. Living in New York is tough. Winter in New York is tough, maybe for a week, but it's easier to live here, of course. We're all humans, right? That's not going to change. How do you establish that whole ecosystem? How do you establish a regulation from the tax space, from sanitation, from tourism, from all these things, and how these ecosystems start looking at the US and Europe, and how do these companies that have success and startups, how do they get capital and investment to jump and have the equal opportunities as their competitors in the US and Asia? Many will say, oh, that's science fiction. It looks like a movie or whatnot, but that is the pathway. That's what we have to do. And I think you have huge opportunities. What would I like? As the activist said, I have a dream that everything that I mentioned needs to be translated into more employment, formal employment, etc. And I think that's what UNDP wants to see. And that's why we're all here today. Thank you for the invite. Thank you, Jose Carlos. Very inspirational, and some elements are very important. The importance of data. We are here in an uncertain time, and what are the tendencies, the trends? The future is already here, and this is why we're focused on the future, also capitalizing the opportunities and the perspective of economic sustainability and the environment. So an important factor here, and what's interesting is to hear, as we mentioned before, moving on to the Q&As that we have from our DR public, and also some of the questions that are reaching us digitally, specifically over Zoom. I think that one of the important factors is digitalization. It's a reality. In fact, we've seen how these big European companies that were operators are now all a digital platform in the US. So it was traditionally, tourism was traditionally led by small businesses and agencies, but that's not the way it is anymore. And we have to consider the fact that it also opens opportunities, because digitalization will enable us to have access to many markets that were difficult previously, because that communication was very difficult in the chain. And what we can do from UNDP and the international community, how do we integrate all of the digital infrastructure regionally? How do we implement it regionally and nationally? That would be a huge opportunity. The environmental factor that you mentioned is the same. The main thing that we have in our favor is tourism, really. People come to see our parks, our beaches. That's what we sell. In fact, we have a lot of environmental initiatives, and towards the future, All of our projects include the environmental component, both regionally and nationally. All of the new strategies and all of the new destinations, all the new hotels are all integrating with the environment specifically to create this opportunity. The tourism in our country has varied so much. This has also led to a change in the behavior of tourists themselves. We're seeing short-term tourists and higher expenditure, but we also have the environmental tourism and also housing tourism, not only because they are coming to visit, but they're going to buy or move to the DR. So these are very interesting changes, and it leads these initiatives, this reality that we're seeing all around us. Great. And we're certainly adding to these ideas regionally, specifically in the DR with the environmental involvement, its communities, etc. So we're seeing lots of opportunities to diversify, economically sustainable, and also environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable as well. Anna, let's move on to the Q&As. Before moving on, one of the questions that reached us for both panelists on the platform, and I wanted to remind the audience that we have someone here in our room with a mic, and if you want to ask a question, please just raise your hand and it will be well received. One of the questions on Zoom, and I believe we can certainly ask Rafael and Jose Carlos to answer this question. How are we able to strengthen cooperation among Latin America, the Caribbean, and European Union to create new partnerships, instruments that are innovative, that would work for both regions to really drive this transformation towards sustainable tourism? What are your ideas on how to strengthen cooperation between both regions with human resources and wonderful ideas overall? I'm going to tell a specific case, so it's not just theory. You already have a strong tourism structure, and there's the Jane Barza Lopez, which is Spanish. There are many chains here. I was invited to another forum in Madrid for tourism of luxury tourism and how to make Madrid a group tourism site. They're opening a new Marriott and new W hotel as well. So there's a whole process of guiding those strategies. And there was a company that was requested investment in Mallorca. There are only hotels. There's 7 million international tourists. It's like the DR. It lives off of tourism. And they've focused on tech for the sector. They're engineers and they're developing. They have very complex tech, but it's very simple as far as a business model. It collects the data from the hotel, and you can do a lot of actions, investments, and revenue calculations on your app. And on the other hand, For visitors, if they want to reach someone, if they want to arrive at the hotel and they want to use the app and they already have their room number and everything else. So that helps both ways. And it's been tried out, tested in Majorca. And of course, that could work here in the Ambassador Hotel, for instance. If you have businesses such as that are here, that are also developing, and that development is approved in Europe or in just one hotel in Europe, then you can scale up a business from here and to Europe. And that's how a lot of businesses started, Google and many others, right? So that's really the pathway. How do you identify the startup ecosystem that's already in place? For example, the Israelis who had Startup Nation, Israel is very romantic, but it doesn't generate a lot of revenue. But once that business has management capabilities, not only an idea, business plan, and knows how to execute a good business plan, that's where a good focus should be placed. We have to look at these companies like a protection zones, like the environment. We have to protect those startups. And that's what needs to be protected. Another thing that needs to be understood is why would it start in the Dominican Republic? Well, you're competing also from the larger market with the larger market, the US, California, the developers in Miami or New York. And of course, you have to give them the same conditions to come to your country as you would like to have when you export your technology. So that's a two-way street. Now there's a new opportunity. We're investing. The World Bank is investing. There are many investments in sustainable tourism, and the connection is the question. And I think that would be an important factor. I think there are few partnerships between the Europe and Latin America in the 80s, perhaps. There was more strengthening of that connection. The new generations don't have that awareness. We have to see how we can create those connections so that the Latin American people don't feel us so far away. The US is closer. It's a big competitor for the EU. So I think we, on our hand, need to reach out, and Spain needs to be a catalyzer. And it's easier to create these links between Spanish speaking countries such as yours and ours. Yes, definitely in tech. First, there's a lot that Europe can offer Latin America and the Caribbean, but Latin America and the Caribbean needs that support, and that support has a huge advantage. It will open markets and opportunities to smaller and mid-sized companies that don't have another way of surviving. It will democratize entrepreneurship that today, currently, and unfortunately, there's a lack of capital and organization and support. So we focus on the midterm. We're looking at the fact that tourism is highly led by corporations. But we want to create a whole series of services, of tourism services that are supported by tech. And this is an important factor. For example, how do we build platforms on the academic level and create links, programs, transfer programs, knowledge transfer programs. Another factor is the management, the destination management. One thing that Europe has done very well is that the whole system really motivates people to go out and buy and spend. Local population is more benefited by tourism management. So how do we create these links where we can create these spaces, these tourist spaces where the tourist, the visitor feels motivated to go out and to buy and spend? And that's another factor, which is not just about creating destination and strategies, but also from the perspectives of inf- of infrastructure. And that's going to be one of the challenges in destinations. Thank you. And we're certainly seeing more happening in this aspect. So please, if you could introduce yourself and introduce your question. I'm Ambassador of Guatemala in the Dominican Republic. I would like to first congratulate you for this wonderful activity and having Frank Gilly and gurus in tourism in Latin America. Well, that's certainly motivational. And having you here is wonderful. I'm going to focus on 2 points: the digital nomads and ecosystems. How do we in the DR and in our countries in Central America, how can we develop an ecosystem such as New York so that instead of these people going to New York or the Caribbean and Central America, how do they come here? And that's where UNDP and these important organizations play a part. And how do they, how can you help us disseminate that information? There are people that come, love the weather, and come live here and manage their businesses globally from these locations. What suggestions do you have so we can develop a new ecosystem that can work and that can help us reach more people with our offer? We worked with this, and we worked on this with Ana Maria, who is a representative from Guatemala, from UNDP, and I think we're all convinced at UNDP. What we don't want to confuse, and there are other agencies and development banks that do this, but we can't lose our DNA. This needs to work for people. We're not talking about technology as the end, it's just a measure to transform and to provide this service to these economies. And I think that's a change. I think for all of Latin America, and specifically for Central America, need to make an effort. The size of an economy depends on its tech development. If you have a business, as I mentioned, in the US and China, and that company has success, you have huge success with the amount of people that there are, and your business can grow very quickly, for instance, in the US with such a large population. If you're in a smaller country, Spain is a smaller country, for instance, you have to collaborate and you have to unite with, join hands with other countries as we've done in Spain. But I think in Central America and the Caribbean, there is, for instance, banks that operate amongst each other, and they make agreements, and governments make agreements amongst each other. And when we're looking at, for example, customs routes and systems, which also collaborate with each other. So, insofar as the destinations in the Caribbean are being developed, more nomads from the US and the Caribbean and the European Union will be attracted.
Have these agreements for cooperation that have to do with good practice, and it's a classic topic of UNDP. We identify what has worked well and how we can replicate these destinations and these programs in other countries. As you have said, Ambassador, the UNDP would be a good point to start, but there must be a willingness from the countries and cooperation. But what I want to say clearly is that the opportunity is there. It's not the future, it's the present. The decision is not whether this will develop or not. The decision is whether you want it to develop in your country or to go elsewhere. That's the decision. And what's happening is that it's a fact. It's not a future. Thank you very much. We have seen that there are many questions. We will not be able to answer all of them, but we will like to invite maybe two more questions. One from the audience, please. Good morning. My name is Valeria Montalvo. Jose Carlos Diaz. I was paying close attention to the bottlenecks that you mentioned, and I would like to maybe take into account also as a bottleneck the anti-vaccine movements that have risen in our region. How is the UNDP acting within the situation that is more generalized? And as you well mentioned, the matter of vaccines, the support is not only a matter of solidarity, is always something that is priority of the health and the development of the region. So how can the UNDP face this situation that evidently will be affecting the economies, tourism, and all the different sectors, primarily health? Thank you. You said anti-vaccine movement, correct? Yes, from UNDP, what we recommend is to vaccine and the recommendations of the WHO. But this pandemic, there is just what we have now, but the duration of the vaccines of the pandemic before was 2 years, and this would probably take a year and a half more, thanks to science and thanks to vaccination. This is a fact. This cannot be argued. This is what we see from the UNDP, but we are very respectful to countries, and there's a constitution and national legislation, and whether you can force people to get vaccinated or not, this is basically something that has to be discussed at a national level. In the case of Spain, maybe as an extreme, we have managed to have double vaccination of 90% of the population of higher than 12 years old. And there's a society that's aware that it's beneficial to them and they receive the vaccine. I don't know exactly if we can talk about this at an organizational level, but the matter of making this mandatory can bring some problems with respect to national rights that are very complex and that, of course, we respect. And another question, this time directed towards Rafael from the Zoom platform, our digital audience. Facing climate change, how can circular economy become a useful tool to transition towards sustainable tourism? In our tourism destinations, what we're trying to implement is a strategy to minimize impact, and we're seeing this in water treatment. We're seeing that the residual water treatment then ends up going to irrigation and all the activities that require water not to have a negative impact. In the same way, tourists take destinations. In the case of Punta Cana, we have a model with respect to recycling and exportation of all this waste, if we could call it that, in a way that we're trying to turn this into a material that can be exported towards other countries that need those materials. But we want to do the same thing with Sargasso in Punta Cana. There's a company that is using this Sargasso to produce products in a way that we can then even find a definite solution to this product that in other scenarios would be hard to manage. So we have worked on several strategies in this sense. Well, it's great to mix these different pathways of communication between the digital and presential. Now we have a question from Ecuador, and I think maybe it would be interesting to talk about this. Greetings from Ecuador. From the question, we say, what strategies should be taken into account considering that in Latin America we have community tourism to reach a more inclusive tourism in all our territories? We will have a quick reaction from our panelists. Yes, definitely. This is an opportunity, given that we have seen people want to learn the culture, they want to know the country, they want to experience where they are to meet their people aside from purchasing goods and services. The challenge is how can we create the conditions for this destination to maintain its authenticity, but at the same time has an infrastructure that allows tourists to be able to have to access these areas or these markets. And that's where the challenge is. It's one of the topics I mentioned a while ago. And that's one of the great opportunities that we have with collaboration. How can we get into these destinations and integrate the population and include them within what is considered tourism in each one of our countries? And that's the path, infrastructure and order. Well, it's another path with the beaches you have. Tourism, tourists come here looking for these beaches. And this happens in Spain as well. It's harder to combine a cultural destination with these beautiful beaches, but what you're doing in Santo Domingo with recovering the colonial area is something spectacular. And this starts giving life to the city and has its own process that, as I've seen in the city of Madrid, the center of Madrid was quite degraded in the 80s, and it has been recovered urbanistically speaking. And today it's one of the destinations of great attractiveness. There's 4 high-level museums that have been built with a lot of effort and investment in the last 40 years. So it's not just a matter of chance, but there's a potential here that we need to support as much as we can. And there's also a point of the focus that I wanted to share here today. Technology and digitalization helps. In Spain, I collaborated with the Santa Maria Barreal Foundation. It's an NGO that recovers historical assets, especially churches, and working with an architect where we try to work in different aspects of this infrastructure. And here they have an agreement with a company where I am part of the council of using big data and AI and virtual reality and augmented reality to develop and to potentiate the use of the historical heritage that is there for us to use. This is another niche that will be opening, which is more complicated because it's obviously a different perspective than the beaches, but I would potentiate that. And I think in Santo Domingo, you're doing that well. And I say that as a user. When I go to the colonial area, I feel quite happy. Well, Anna, I think we have reached the point to close the session. We've had 2 hours of a lot of inspiration. We have some key messages that we have learned. One is that the future is with us today here now. And also something that you mentioned in your last presentation, people after the pandemic are looking for something different, unique experiences, and how we identify this value niche in different investments towards a diversified offer can potentialize the small, medium-sized companies and authenticity, because this is one of the characteristics that reflect well upon the Dominican Republic. Ana, yes, thank you very much from my side. I would like to thank all the audience that has followed us from the different social platforms, our channel, from Facebook Live, Zoom, and this debate. We generated a lot of new ideas, new learning experiences that have been shared, and it's a pleasure to know that we do not stay here at this point, but we'll continue with this cycle of events about sustainable tourism. In 2 weeks from now, we will go with another event, and the host country will be Jamaica. So again, we stay in the region, this beautiful region that has a lot to offer, and we'll continue to talk about this topic that moves us, finalizing this cycle of events about tourism in the month of November. Together with the UNDP and the Ulac Foundation, we will present a report, a policy brief about all these ideas generated in the scenarios. And that's why I would like to thank our panelists today, Rafael, Jose Carlos, Linda Indar, that was connected with us digitally, because everything that we talked about will also be set in this report that will be shared with all of you. To the audience present here, we invite you to a snack that we have in the back part of the room. And I would like to thank all the people from the Chancellor's office, from the Ministry of Foreign Relations, that have been key to make this event a reality in a hybrid modality with these new circumstances in this country. And I would like to also thank you from all the UNDP team supporting us from the regional office of Latin America and the Caribbean in New York. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.